But I think that is the only way to steer towards a society in which we are in balance and reconnected with the ecosystem around us, because we are completely dependent on all those other life forms.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name is Kirst de Vieria. I'm a pre-master student in creative industries with a background in rural development and innovation. Joining me are Megan Cummings, exchange student in media communications and culture from the UK, Teresa Ruju, exchange student studying arts and culture from Italy, and Malu Correa from Brazil, who is also a pre-master student in creative industries and has a background in sustainable fashion. Our interview guest is Nienke Aangenendt, a Radboud alumnus in cultural studies who now works at Natuur, Milieu, Gelderland. In this interview, she talked about how she found her job despite her cultural background, and why her background is still relevant in her work today. She also mentions the importance of artists and storytellers in transition movements. We also talk a bit about sustainability in fashion and the parallels with other sectors such as agriculture and food. That and much more, coming right up.
Now we come to our guest. Nienke, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. I'm Nienke Aangenendt. I currently work as a project leader for Natuur, Milieu, Gelderland, which is based in Arnhem. And I also used to study at the Radboud University. I studied cultural studies here, and I finished my bachelor's 10 years ago already, which feels a long time back, but I also feel very much at home when I'm back here. So I'm happy you invited me.
So you work at Natuur Milieu, Gelderland. Could you say a bit more about what kind of organization this is?
Yes, for sure. Natuur Milieu Gelderland is a nature and environmental organization which does different things in the province of Gelderland to fight for the causes of nature and environment. We do this on different topics. So, for example, about agriculture and food, but also the energy transition towards sustainable energy. It's for policies around nature in the province. So we try to protect that as well. And also we do some projects about circular economy. And we have two sides of our work. That's a part is lobby. So influencing policy, trying to talk with policymakers and on a provincial level. But we also do projects where we try to cooperate with a lot of stakeholders, different stakeholders. So it's from citizens to farmers to other organizations or other environmental organizations or local organizations to really make a difference. Yeah.
And what is your role in this?
Well, I work as a project leader on different kind of projects where the common thread is biodiversity. And most of my projects are about agriculture and food, but I also do some projects, for example, about reducing light pollution and also with young people. So to get young people involved in these kind of topics. Well, here you are, so.
So we're just wondering what the transition was from what you previously did to now, and what sort of overlapping aspects there are between the two different careers.
Yeah, after my bachelor's at the Radboud University, I did an internship for an orchestra, and there I did marketing research, and then I kind of rolled into a career of marketing performing arts. So I worked for different performing arts organizations, mainly for theater and dance. And after some years, I really loved the work, to be honest. It was a very dynamic environment, very creative environment. I also got to work with a lot of young, very passionate artists. So it was also always very inspiring to be around. But I also felt that I lacked some sense of purpose in the work somehow, that I felt that I wanted to contribute to something that is going on in the world and that I couldn't really find in this marketing work. So then I kind of made a big leap and decided to quit my job at a theater where I was working at that moment as head of the marketing department, and to make a transition to a career focused on, I wanted to contribute to a regenerative society. And for me, that meant that I decided to work with my hands for, it became 2 years, because I wanted to actually experience what we can do on a very practical level. So I started working as a volunteer for a regenerative farm, which used to be based close to Nijmegen, Bodemzicht. Now it moved to Lochem, and now it's called Het Gagel. And I was so inspired by this idea of we do not only need to reduce our impact, but we can actually help to revive ecosystems and to facilitate other life forms than just us ourselves. And then I got the opportunity to also work there at the farm as an employee, which I was very, very grateful for. And that got things rolling. And after working on the land, but also working for the National Forestry Company doing harvesting work, I found this job at Natuur, Milieu, Gelderland, which combined my passion for these kind of topics, but also working on it in the form of different projects.
We wanted to ask about this idea of degrowth, reducing the amount of production, or sort of aiming more towards sustainable growth in production, and just sort of which perspective do you take?
I feel that there's different ways to approach economies or how we want to make structures that create our society. And degrowth, I think it's one of the routes we need to take. So it's very important that we reduce our need for energy or reduce our fast fashion. We need to reduce what we buy. We need to reduce our waste, for example. There's a lot of things that we should definitely reduce and not aim for more and more, because that's the current economic system, of course. We need to be in competition, and we need to win, and we need to sell more, because that's the only way to stay alive as a company, to beat the competition. I think there's also a different story, which I call the regenerative story, but that's also a way to not only think about degrowth, but to create systems that sustain not only us as human beings, but also other life forms, like the tree or the plant or the wolf. So to incorporate not only our human interests, but also the non-human interests, and to see how can we both thrive. How can we create a product or create an agricultural system in which humans can thrive, but non-humans can also thrive. So I don't know exactly what the overlap is with the degrowth, but I found this idea very inspiring and also very challenging, because it's so different from how we now do our decision making, how we make our policies, how we make our companies, how we school people, how we view nature. Is it the landscape that I'm just walking through when I'm going on a hike, or is it something that I can actually relate to? So that makes it very different to move towards the world that I would envision. But I think that is the only way to steer towards a society in which we are in balance and reconnected with the ecosystem around us, because we are completely dependent on all those other life forms. Everything we eat is also another life form. We breathe the air, we drink the water. So the paradigm in which we feel that we are completely disconnected from this is actually pretty weird.
Maybe you can say a bit more about who sort of the target audience of the projects that you work on is. Do you feel that there is an interest in regeneration?
Well, I think especially in farming it became very popular because also the film My Biggest Little Farm.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people saw that and found it very inspiring. And during the COVID times, more and more people started to look to more local initiatives and had to find different kind of hobbies, of ways to socialize. And in the Netherlands and also in Gelderland, a lot of social agricultural communities are popping up where farmers actually cooperate with the people around. And there's all these different models for that, like a Lenteland farm or a Herenboeren farm. Well, this is not very international, but in other countries it's the same. That is a very accessible way to find a bit of this reconnection to the food you eat, and also to find each other again in taking the responsibility for our food, but also our landscape. Because if farmers are now supplying to big companies, they usually cannot decide on the price for themselves. There's a set price. They don't have a lot of influence on that. So that also takes some autonomy away. Yeah. And by providing to local food chains or directly to consumers locally, you can suddenly be in conversation and explain why is the price the way it is, and how do I work on my farm? How do I take care of this piece of land? Do I take care of the soil? Do I use pesticides or not? And then suddenly you can be connected again in that sense. And I think that's a very interesting movement that is happening at the moment, and people are really interested in this also.
So it's maybe also really about not just regenerating ecosystems, but also regenerating social systems and communities.
Definitely. I think it's intertwined. It's necessary to take both of those things into account. Yeah.
We have a question also about Kate Raworth and the donut economy. Is that something that informs the work of Natuur, Milieu, Gelderland?
The thing is that we, as an organization that works in the province, we don't have that much influence on global or national level, and that's where a lot of change needs to be as well. We're quite a small team. That's good to know. We have big ambitions, but we are a small team, so we are very limited in what we can do. We also don't have unlimited funding, so everything we do needs to be funded somehow. That defines also sometimes the project you choose. Some topics are a very hot topic, other topics are just not so very much attractive somehow, influencing policies, for example. It's not something that a fund is often giving money for.
Right.
So we don't always have all the decisions ourselves in that sense. And our main cause is, I think, protecting this nature and environmental things like the pesticides in our water, or there's now the big nitrogen crisis. And I think we are most involved in the energy transition and the farming transition, but only on what we can influence on the level of the province. So we don't really do campaigns towards consumers, for example. What we do try is to get people involved, for example, by connecting them to local farmers, or I love the project of reducing light pollution, to get a lot of people active to switch off their lights or to go to their municipality and see if they can make some impact there. And also the experience of how it can be different. I think that for me personally was very powerful to really see it and experience how it can be otherwise than what we are used to. That's more my kind of style of projects personally than teaching about all the bad stuff, which is not less important.
Do you feel that in the general communication about sustainability, the approach has been far too doom and gloom focused and like, oh, you better change or else all these bad things are going to happen?
I wouldn't say that there's too much doom and gloom, because there is doom and gloom. It's there. And it's really hard to digest sometimes, especially when you work in these there's a lot of activists or people doing a lot of work in these kind of topics, and it can be very intense and frustrating, but also sad and painful to get all this information all the time. And also maybe for you as students, that you read the news and you read about climate change and it makes you worried, what can I do? What will the world look like in 10 or 20 or 50 years? What can I do maybe to as some kind of contribution to make it better? And it can also make you feel very powerless, because it's so big. It's so big, and it's everywhere. So that's challenging. And it's very important that we know what is actually going on. However, I think the other side of the medal is that we need perspective to take action. And that's why we also need the hopeful stories to see what can we do. We need to find each other in that. And how can we make these new stories, these new systems together? I think that's very important, because it gives us a way to put this energy of grief or sadness or frustration or anger or fear into action. In transitions, storytelling is super important. We need new stories to inspire us and to lay a different foundation for the systems we build, a change of paradigm. And in that, I think telling stories and being able to get people involved through these stories is very, very important. I would not say that I'm a very awesome storyteller, but of course my work used to be to make stories about arts and culture, about artists, about their motivation. And I think that experience helps. And also there's a lot of people involved. I said we gather stakeholders, but it's always people work. So if you have experience in bringing different people together, set up projects, work on project-based systems, that's very valuable as well. But of course, I lacked a lot of knowledge. But sometimes it's also a benefit to not be the expert, but to be able to translate it so that I'm the noob, the green, the piece of person who doesn't really know. But that sometimes helps me to be able to translate the very in-depth expert information to a bit more accessible story or explanation.
In my career, there's a line, but I think artists can be very necessary in these transitions because they can provide you with a different point of perspective, and they can deconstruct or reconstruct views, beliefs, and I think that's a very, very important skill that we could use more in the policy making or the world of people who want to contribute to transitions as well.
Do you have maybe sort of an example in that?
Well, what I personally love as a project is the Embassy of the North Sea. And they are trying to research how can we listen to the sea and how can we, in the end, finally, also speak for the sea. Because we make all kinds of decisions that involve the North Sea. We build platforms to drill for oil, we put windmills there, we get fish out of the sea. But there's no one really saying from the point of view of the sea what they think of that. And they try to research that with artists as well. And there's an artist, I don't remember their name, but what they did is they made a system where you can experience how it is to be an eel. Oh, wow. So you can actually move like a sea creature. And that's a really change of perspective because usually we don't know how other beings like animals or plants, how they perceive the world, and we have all kinds of impact on them, but they never talk back. So art can be an entrance to get a little bit more understanding of what it is we do as a human to them and how it could be for them.
That's super interesting and a very great example, I think, of how artists and people in the cultural sector can kind of contribute to changing how we experience the world, really. I once did this Council of All Beings workshop where we had to put on masks that we made with things we found in nature. And then we had people sitting in the middle of this circle, and we had questions from different representatives of nature. It's pretty weird in the beginning, but it is also quite eye-opening.
It's amazing. I love it. I recently facilitated the Council of All Beings.
That's awesome.
Around the Veluwe area.
Nice.
Yeah, it's from the work that reconnects from Joanna Macy.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very cool way as well to play with these perspectives and these rules. Yeah. And that's why I like the work of Joanna Macy a lot.
Yeah.
She's an activist she's I think in her 80s now. All her life she was an activist, but also a Buddhist. And she's very much involved in this question. Like when we get all this information, we tend to shut down. Like, I just don't want to hear it anymore. I don't know what I can do about it, so whatever, then I'll just take this flight to Ibiza because everyone else does the same and I won't change it. And she has been developing group work to work with these emotions, but also turn it to action towards a regenerative system or a thriving society where it's not just for us as humans. I found that very empowering. But I also often turn off the news, or I just sometimes it can be just too much. And then I think, okay, I'm just going to do my projects and try to make an impact there. And the rest of the world, I cannot do so much about that. So,
do you feel that maybe some of this could be more broadly communicated? Maybe the work that reconnects by Joanna Macy? Because it sounds a bit like maybe that's something that helps you personally, but is it also something in your work that maybe on a broader level pertains to sustainability in the cultural sector?
Yeah, I think it really starts with your and my generation as well.
Right.
I think we need to be the change.
Yes.
And I think the work of Joanna Macy can be very valuable in that. But it also starts with education. So at the universities or at the cultural studies as well, because you learn about the arts and society and all kinds of abstract theories, but then you are finished and then you go into the real world and how does that actually work? What can I do? For me, that was quite a surge in the beginning, and I think for more people it's like that. And I find it very motivating to know that we can all do our little bit, to not make it too big, but all do our little bit. Even that is not easy because it needs some conversations with each other and reflection and finding out what makes you on fire, what you want to do, what you feel that it's in your scope, in your range of influence you have, and that suits you. And it can be as a researcher, but it can be as an artist, or it can be as a policymaker, or I don't know what you are aspiring, or a fashion designer, creating a label that is slow fashion and sustainable and from local farmers and produced locally for a fair price. So I always try to, maybe that's not just in my work, but in my personal life as well, to encourage people and to do so in the limits you have, in the scope that you can. And I recently did the facilitators training for the work of Joanna Macy. So I'm
with Lian Kasper.
With Lian Kasper,
Yes.
I'm teaching a workshop at the WUR this Monday with her. So
wow,
that's really nice. Yeah. So,
Small
but
world.
that's also new to me. So I'm also learning in that, and it's hard to bring those worlds together with my work sometimes because a lot of my work is also in the current structures.
Could you say a bit about the sort of the bottlenecks and those issues of like working in the system? And I'm also thinking about the current government and policies. These are all kind of limiting factors, I think, in terms of sustainability. It seems to be kind of going the wrong direction. Do you feel that in your work?
Definitely, yeah. And also, especially in the agricultural transition, in the province that is very geared towards maintaining the current status quo and focusing on technological solutions to the climate impact of food production, instead of making a change to fundamental, sustainable agricultural structure. And that can be sometimes very frustrating. But on the other hand, I also meet so many people who are so very much working towards that. And I think there's an undercurrent of people who really know that things need to change and that are really working on that. And that takes maybe also some time to get to the layer of policy making. But yeah, there's a lot of tension in this thing at the moment. And I'm now, for example, I set up traineeship for young people together with IVN Gelderland. It's another green organization. And we called it the Voice of the Veluwe. And there we dived into also rights for nature. And then at the end of the traineeship, we invite policymakers to come to their event and to also meet these new ideas. So, and also we invited artists to work with them and to do all kinds of exercises of deep mapping the environment, for example.
And what kind of artists can we think of here?
We invited Rita Baijens. She's an adventurer, but also a writer, an artist. And with the group, we went into the forest close to Wageningen to do a deep map of the environment. So that's one of the methods she uses. Another method she used was to make a machine that speaks for the sea. So you can have a conversation with the sea, and it's an AI system.
Wow.
So you can ask a question and then it answers, but the sea doesn't have the same language as we do. It's not linear, it's completely different kind of language. So we don't understand it with our rational brain, but it's very fluent. And yeah, she wrote some books about these topics as well. She shakes you a little bit, with what she does. Like, hey, you can look in a different way. What is happening if we do this? Or what is happening if we do that?
So speaking about fashion, because it came up a lot during the lecture, some of the theory that we read or that we covered had a lot to do about sort of the relationship of consumers with products and how important it is to develop sort of long-lasting relationships with, for example, clothing or other items, rather than having this sort of fast fashion. Do you think that some of that maybe pertains also to the way we relate to agricultural products?
Oh, I never viewed it that way, but I think there's definitely similarities. In our food is also quick food, you just consume it quickly. It's always accessible. You can buy it everywhere. You don't really know where it came from, just like your clothing. You don't know how it is produced or by who or from which country it maybe came from. So yeah, I definitely see a relationship there. There's even the slow food movement. So you have slow fashion, slow food. I'm also curious because I'm not so familiar with the fashion industry. Were there any insights about this relationship between consumer and brand that you found valuable or insightful? Or
when it comes to fast fashion, I don't think so. I think the fast fashion companies usually they don't consider itself much the relation of the customer with the clothes, but more on who they are targeting. They don't see this process of relation. While in slow fashion, you kind of need to fall in love with the prospect of your future customer. So you want them to fall in love with what you're making. So this relation that you want to have between the customer and the clothes, I mean, it's kind of like when you're cooking and then you have to cut ingredients and you have to prepare everything and you have all the mise-en-scene process of creating the food. You kind of want them to know how it is in the slow fashion because you kind of need to justify a little bit on why it's like that. So I think in the process of slow fashion, yes, they have this relation, but for fast fashion, I don't think that is even considered in any part of their scale process of creating, especially because even the people that are creating, they have no relation to the creation. They are not in all of the parts of the process of creating the clothes, while in the slow fashion, you're kind of intertwined in every part of the development of the clothes, of the pattern, or I almost want to say the fetus of the clothes, because it's all a part of the development of the clothes until it's actually born into a piece that you see and you touch. So in the slow fashion movement, I think it has that urge to show how it was made, kind of like when you have a baby and you want to show the pictures of when you were small and everything. It's kind of like the same process. I think with slow fashion, I mean, at least my experience with slow fashion was I wanted everyone to see how I got there because it's such an intense process. It kind of becomes your little child, your little thing that you're so proud of. So you want the consumer to have that same relation because after it's out of your house, after your fabric, everything, you want them to take care of it the same way that you took all the process. So
I feel we're coming back to the storytelling as well, which is very important then. And it also makes me think a bit of the cooperation between farmers and local people, that you really know, you reconnect to the origin of the product. And whether it's something you eat or something you wear, that's the main thing that we have lost at this moment. And how would it be if we could reconnect to that again? What would our clothes mean to us then? It would be totally different, probably.
I don't think everyone would have that involvement with what they're wearing because, I mean, the slow fashion movement, if you think about it, it's an expensive movement because you are part of the entire process. So the public that will be using it, they either need to be on a higher income to be able to purchase it, or they're going to be having to make it themselves. And to make it yourself, you're not going to be selling it because it's for you. So you're already that part of the relation. I think that is something that I feel it's something to be considered when it comes to the slow fashion and the fast fashion and everything. Don't think that quite a big part of the people that in the end would be consuming the slow fashion would be actually understanding what they are using. A few months ago, I was watching videos on TikTok and social media, and it came a video for me of cows being separated from their calves right after they were born for the production of milk and everything. And I went on a rabbit hole of milk production. And after that moment, I started only having in my house from a specific brand from the Netherlands who have this concern of having the separation of the cow with the mom and everything after a certain period. And you notice the difference. It sounds really ridiculous when you say it, but like the milk tastes different. You feel that even if it's just a thing in my head because I know that the part of the production of it was happier and in a way more...
No, but it's true.
Isn't it?
It is true.
It's not in my head then because for me it was something quite crazy. And after that, you kind of want to think about, well, but all the other things that we consume, what actually am I not seeing that it can be so cruel? Like this process that I had when watching, I was crying for hours after I saw that video and I couldn't understand why I would be doing that. And I remember being so sad about knowing that so little the percentage in Dutch farmers that produce milk, they actually are part of this movement. And for me, I think saying about this with clothing, it's kind of ridiculous because we're talking about animals and life, and clothes we're talking about.
I remember watching the movie The True Cost. It's about the clothing industry. And I watched it when I was in Lux, in the movie, in Art House. And after the documentary, I felt like I wanted to take my clothes off because I felt so dirty. I felt like I am wearing something that has such a horrible story, you know?
Yeah.
This is made by modern day slaves in a way, and in dangerous situations for extremely low pay, just for me to wear this. And I felt horrible. So I can completely relate to you. And the stories around our clothing is just like our food, you know? It's just a different story.
How can we connect the projects that you work with in the food industry, maybe with the slow fashion industry or the fashion industry in general, or the arts and culture sector in general, to maybe have the changes that you are doing on all the other sectors to have it also in the arts and culture sector and specifically in fashion?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea how we could be doing that?
Well, it makes me think of the wool, because in the Netherlands, a lot of wool of farmers is just thrown away as a waste product. Sometimes they even need to pay to put it out because it's too labor intensive, and the prices for labor in the Netherlands are too high to actually transform it into clothing. But I think this topic has been more popular, so there's some businesses who are now trying to use the Dutch wool again for clothing. And then, the prices for a woolen sweater are completely different than if you would go to a polyester sweater in Zara, for example. That's, I think, a really interesting example to see what do we actually have on the land here, or as a resource here available that we could turn into clothing. But the price is... I think we're so used to these extreme low prices in food as well, but also in fashion. Yeah, there's also this. There was a company who tried. It went bankrupt, but they tried to make clothing out of nettle in the Netherlands, like on a big scale. And they didn't succeed, unfortunately. But it's a very interesting fiber. You can make rope from it yourself. I can definitely advise you to Google that and try it at home. It's a very strong fiber, and it's a nice summer project to try it out.
There are many sustainable fibers actually in research. One of them is called seed cell. It's developed in Iceland, and it's basically a medicinal type of fiber.
Oh?
So the fabric that you can develop with that fiber kind of resembles like a polyester, but the type of feeling of the fabric. But it's actually regenerative for your skin. So it's actually considered to be used for hospitals, sports, military, everything. So I think that there are so many types of different sustainable fibers out there that can be used. But I think there's not a lot of actual active research or implementary plans on making it actually a more viable thing. It's a lot on the desire, and then the information is there and everything is there, but it's either too expensive to be implemented, or no government would want to implement such an expensive thing on there.
Yeah, now it's really dependent on the individual entrepreneurs to do the research and to find or to create a chain where you can do the harvesting and the processing of the product and then making it into clothing. And it's also with bio-based materials, but also with food products, for example, from agroforestry systems that we're not as used to eating maybe certain products. So it's important that you always have these pioneers, but a lot of them also fail after a few years because they have to take a lot of risk. There's no chain yet, there's no structure yet, there might not be consumers yet who know the product. Yeah, that's very challenging.
I think also a big part of it is, I don't think sometimes there's a lot of marketing on these areas. For example, if I was not connected to fashion, if I hadn't done classes about sustainable fibers, I would have never heard of this. And I think that even sometimes on the field of arts and culture or the field of fashion, this is not some information that unless you're actually searching for it, it's not going to appear for you. So I think sometimes there's also a lack of marketing on explaining to people that are just going to the supermarket and buying food, and then they see there, one is bio and one is not. But why is the bio one more expensive? And then if you don't know what is the difference between the bio and the normal, you're just going to go to the normal one because the difference makes in your pocket, but you don't know actually what the difference is in your body or in the whole ecosystem. So I think that kind of goes the same also with fashion. So I think the same type of implements that you could do with the food industry to make people understand more how it works, the entire process of production. I think that can be done also with fashion.
Well, I think you're right that their education is very important, but it's also good to know that we found out that education is not all. Because most people know that flying is not so good for the environment, but a lot of people still do it. So there's still this gap between knowledge and actions. And especially in the Netherlands, but also other places, price plays a big role. Also the culture, what is normal? What do other people do? So there's a lot of more factors who influence our consumer behavior. You should ask some psychologist about this because I'm not an expert, but just informing is not enough, but it's a part. And I think, that's why I like the storytelling, to not only be about sending the negative information, but also reconnecting to the story of what are we talking about here. Yeah.
I would like to ask a bit more about that. Like, how do you move, perhaps from a marketing perspective, how do you get people to move from just being aware of all of the problems and challenges in the world and mobilize them into action?
Man, I wish I had the key. This is also what I learned from Joanna Macy, for example, but it starts with recognizing what is actually going on and taking just a moment to realize that. So to get this information maybe about how your clothing is produced, and instead of just going to the next paper of the newspaper, taking a moment to actually let it sink in. What does this mean? How does it make me feel? Oh, it makes me feel really uncomfortable. I actually don't really want to know this because then I just went shopping last week and now I read this and am I doing something wrong? It's easier to just leave it at that. So that's the first step, but it's pretty lonely as well, Not everyone takes the time to do that. And another step is connection, to make this a shared search, not just from you as a consumer or an individual, but for us as a community or as a society. Hey, we're noticing that this is not going so well. This is quite tough. Let's sit together and see what we can do. I think we cannot make this change without connecting to each other as well. And it's very important to understand that it's not your individual responsibility to change everything. I think a lot of activists feel like that. And that is such a pressing feeling. Man, that's really difficult. So it's important to find communities and find each other in these questions together. And then it's time for new perspectives. So we're not so happy how it's going. What could be the alternative? How would we love to see it? What are the possibilities? Are there maybe some inspiring people who are doing it in a different way? Are there magazines where I can read about slow fashion? Oh, I don't have money for these expensive Dutch woolen sweaters, but maybe we can do a clothing swap on the university. It can be very low key. It doesn't need to be systemic change. It can be just making it accessible in your surrounding together. How can we do it a little bit different? And I think then actually doing that can be very empowering and also helping you dealing with these information to feel, okay, I cannot save the world, but I'm trying to make a little difference together with others. We're holding each other in this, and sometimes we struggle, but that's also fine. We're not perfect. We're just doing our best. And maybe it makes it sound very easy now, but sometimes I think we don't need to make it too hard. And this systemic change is also necessary, and the activism is necessary, and the lobby and the policy making is necessary. That's also necessary for change. But I think we can also make it very small and close to us. And I think that is necessary to keep this hope and to empower ourselves, because it's a difficult time we're in. It's not easy to be young now and to make decisions about your life knowing that things might be different in the future.
Would you say that a worker in the cultural sector can make an impact in sustainable development?
I think you definitely can, because it's intertwined with everything we do. So also with creating the arts. And that can be, are our festivals sustainable? How do we consume? Do we have plastic cups or not? Or is there some kind of deposit? Or what kind of stories do we want to tell with our art? How do we involve people around in art? Can we find artists that have a certain story that needs to be heard and is related to sustainability? I recently heard about a project of art tests. I think there was someone doing research about circularity of paint and stuff. It can be anywhere, I think. And I think also it doesn't always need to be inside of your job description. So also telling them about where you get your colleagues about how you get your food, or being, besides your job, active in certain groups or collectives can also be a way of contributing. But it's really interesting and also challenging maybe to bring your ideals or your wish to work towards sustainability in the world, to combine that with a career. For me, that was also a search. How do I make money and can pay my rent and buy my food, and also do something that I stand for? And I think that's not always easy to find. So you can either be very creative and make up your own projects and ideas, or you should find an organization that clicks, that you feel like, hey, they are working on something that I love, and maybe we can talk, have a coffee. But it's not easy, and it takes time as well. I always think, just try stuff out. I worked for a lot of organizations and I tried a lot out, and when I quit my job, I just started talking to a lot of people and trying to get every little job that I could find that was related to sustainable food. And from there, it went along. So, I mean, you're all smart people. You have a lot of skills and knowledge from your university education, which gives you also quite some opportunities as well in the world to make yourself useful and to contribute in whatever way suits you.
Do you think sustainability is a generational thing, and will it be embedded in future generations, or will it be...
Well, I cannot really speak for your generation, to be honest. And of course, I'm in this green bubble, so I usually talk to people or meet people who are also very much involved in these kind of things. So I don't think I have a very objective way of looking at it. But I do feel that the topic is more in the news. The things are getting more pressing and urgent at this moment. So I can imagine that it's way more relevant for you, and you have more of the necessity to relate to it than maybe the generation of my parents, for example. So I can imagine that in that way you also have to take a position in this and make decisions that, because it's actually impacting your life or your future life. It's also hard to make it inclusive, because you are theoretically educated people who are trained in critical thinking, and so that's not the way everyone is schooled, or that's not the social circle everyone is in, or people have other worries in their lives sometimes and don't have the time to relate to these kind of topics. So in a way, sometimes I also feel privileged that I can focus on this that much. And I sometimes wonder how to make it more inclusive as well, because I meet a lot of theoretical, educated, usually white people in my work, and that's not representing the whole of the society. So that's something that the green movement, or at least me as a person and also our organization, can be more aware of, and is also challenging how to involve also other people in this.
Do you think that like market research into target audiences and things like that could be beneficial in this?
To get people involved, or
to kind of maybe differentiate storytelling or the narrative regarding sustainability and regenerative agriculture, things like that, for different audiences, like tell the story in different ways?
Definitely. Yeah, I want to invite you to come to my company and to advise this, because it was really interesting, because there was a marketing company who did like a trial advertisement for the usual green suspect, so to say, for solar panels. And then the arguments are sustainability, and it's solar powered, so it's better for the environment, and it's lasts for years, and blah, 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 and we say future proof and everything. And then there was this advertisement for the PVV voter, let's say, imaginary. And that was saying things like to be an independent household, not to be dependent on other like foreign gas or something.
Right.
And then the story is completely different, but the goal is the same.
Yeah.
And I think in the field of sustainability, we often tend to only talk about the arguments that are interesting for ourselves.
Yeah.
But it's also about local food. Then we say, yeah, it's better for the environment and biodiversity and less kilometers. And no, you can also say we're proud of the local farmer. We want to eat from the Dutch soil. You know, you can use a lot of arguments to steer something to the same result.
Any final statement?
No, I just want to encourage you to go on this topic. And I'm really happy that you invited me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this conversation. It was really also very inspiring for me to hear your questions and your views. So, thank you for that.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. We had a great time with Nienke and learned a lot, and we hope you did as well. Goodbye.